Echoes in the void. The research station hung in Neptune's shadow like a metal spider, its legs anchored to nothing but the void itself. Dr. Nadia Voss pressed her palm against the observation window, watching ice particles dance in the distant planet's blue glow. 3 years. 3 years since her mentor, Dr. Raymond Pierce, had vanished during the deep ice excavation on Triton. 3 years of searching for answers in the frozen dark. Dr. Voss, you need to see this. The voice crackled through her earpiece, young and trembling with excitement. It was Jenkins, the junior technician who'd been cataloging artifacts from the latest dig site. Nadia turned from the window, her reflection ghosting across the glass. Tired eyes, hair pulled back in a careless knot, the face of someone who'd forgotten what sleep felt like. She made her way through the station's narrow corridors, past humming servers and flickering monitors, until she reached the analysis chamber. Captain James Holloway stood beside Jenkins, his military uniform crisp despite months in deep space. His presence here was a formality, a government watchdog making sure civilian scientists didn't accidentally start an interstellar incident. But the look on his face now wasn't bureaucratic boredom, it was wonder. "Tell me that's not what I think it is," Nadia whispered. Suspended in the containment field was a sphere roughly the size of a human heart. Its surface rippled like liquid mercury, but the readings made no sense. The quantum signature was off the charts, fluctuating between states that shouldn't exist simultaneously. Matter and energy and something else, something the instruments couldn't identify. "We found it 30 meters below the excavation site," Jenkins said, fingers flying across his tablet. "It was in some kind of chamber, completely preserved. The walls had markings, mathematical formulas we've never seen before." James stepped closer to the containment field, his jaw tight. "This is alien technology. We need to contact Earth Command immediately." "Wait." Nadia's mind raced through possibilities. Through years of theoretical physics and late-night arguments with Pierce about the nature of reality itself. "Run a quantum entanglement scan." "If this is what I think it is," the sphere pulsed. Just once, like a heartbeat, and every screen in the lab went dark. Emergency lights flickered on, bathing everything in red. Nadia's skin tingled, the air suddenly electric with possibility and danger. "Everyone back!" James shouted, reaching for Nadia's arm. His grip was firm, protective, and she felt the heat of his palm through her lab coat. But Nadia couldn't look away from the sphere. It was singing now, a frequency that bypassed her ears and resonated directly in her bones. And in that moment she understood. This wasn't just technology. It was a bridge, a door, a key to breaking the fundamental laws that bound humanity to crawling through space at light's glacial pace. This was how they'd done it. The ones who came before. The ones who'd left warnings carved in ice. The sphere pulsed again, and reality stuttered. For a fraction of a second, Nadia saw herself standing in two places at once, existing in quantum superposition. She saw James beside her and also across the room. She saw Jenkins everywhere and nowhere. The universe collapsed and expanded in the same breath, then everything snapped back to normal. What the hell was that? James's voice was hoarse. He was still holding her arm, she realized, and neither of them had moved to break the contact. Nadia looked at him, then at the sphere, then at the readings flooding back onto the screens. Numbers that would rewrite physics textbooks, possibilities that would change everything. That, she said softly, was humanity's future, or our grave. I'm not sure which yet. Outside the station, Neptune's storms raged in eternal blue silence, and deep in the quantum foam of reality itself, something ancient and vast turned its attention toward the tiny motes of light that had just learned to knock on doors that should have remained forever closed. The discovery had been made. Now came the consequences. Ripples through reality, the research vessel. Meridian cut through space like a blade through silk, its quantum drive humming with barely contained power. Lieutenant Sophie Durant stood on the bridge, hands steady on the navigation console despite the tremor she felt deep in her skull. Ever since they'd loaded the sphere aboard 3 days ago, something had been wrong with her, or perhaps something had become right in a way she didn't understand. "Coordinates locked for the testing zone," she reported, her voice professional despite the migraine building behind her eyes. "ETA 47 hours. Captain James Holloway acknowledged with a nod, but his attention was on Dr. Voss, who hadn't left the laboratory deck since departure. The woman was obsessed, running tests around the clock, barely eating. James had started bringing her meals personally, staying to make sure she consumed something other than coffee and determination. Sophie's console flickered. For a heartbeat, she saw coordinates that weren't there, a location in space that existed and didn't exist, folded into dimensions her instruments couldn't measure. Her fingers moved without conscious thought, logging the phantom numbers into a private file. "Lieutenant, are you all right?" She turned to find Dr. Marcus Webb watching her with clinical concern. The neurologist had been studying the crew for routine health monitoring, but Sophie knew the truth. He was checking for side effects, for contamination, for whatever the sphere might be doing to their minds. "Fine, doctor. Just tired. Your pupils are dilated. You're experiencing temporal displacement perception, aren't you? Seeing things slightly before they happen." Sophie's throat tightened. She hadn't told anyone about the visions, about how she sometimes saw the captain walking through a door seconds before he actually did, or heard conversations that hadn't occurred yet echoing in her memory. "It's nothing I can't handle." Webb made a note on his tablet. That's what Dr. Pierce said. 3 days before he vanished, the words hit like ice water. Sophie gripped the edge of her console, forcing herself to breathe. Below them, 7 decks down, the sphere pulsed in its containment field. She felt it like a second heartbeat, synchronizing with her own. Later, during her off shift, Sophie found herself walking to the observation deck. She told herself it was random, but when James appeared in the doorway exactly when she'd known he would, they both understood it was anything but. "You feel it too," she said quietly. It wasn't a question. James crossed the deck, standing close enough that she could feel the warmth radiating from him. Outside the windows, stars stretched into rainbow streaks as the ship maintained faster-than-light travel. "Every time I close my eyes, I see possibilities. Different versions of conversations we haven't had yet. Decisions that branch into 1,000 futures. It's showing us something." The sphere. Sophie turned to face him, and the space between them felt charged with potential energy. "Not just technology. It's conscious, James. Or it's connected to something conscious." He reached up, his fingers barely grazing her cheek, and she felt the ghost of that touch in 20 different timelines simultaneously. "This is dangerous." "Whatever we're opening, I know." She leaned into his hand, the contact grounding her in this timeline, this moment. "But I keep seeing one future over and over, where we don't open it and something worse finds us anyway. At least this way we have a chance." James's other hand found her waist, pulling her closer. They'd been dancing around this attraction since the Neptune station, both too professional to acknowledge it. But quantum mechanics had a way of collapsing possibilities into certainty. "Sophie," he whispered, and then his lips found hers. The kiss was gentle at first, exploratory, but when she pressed closer, it deepened into something desperate. They were two people balancing on the edge of humanity's greatest discovery or its extinction, and in that moment, they chose to feel alive. His hands tangled in her hair. Her fingers traced the muscles of his back. Time became irrelevant. When they finally broke apart, breathless, Sophie saw the future again. Not possibilities this time, but certainty. She saw James standing before an impossible choice, saw herself connected to machines that would rewrite her neural pathways, saw Dr. Voss screaming as reality tore itself apart. She saw Earth burning. "What is it?" James cupped her face, seeing the horror in her eyes. "We have to stop," she gasped. "We have to turn around." "If we activate that device," the ship lurched violently. Alarms shrieked through the corridors, red lights pulsing like arterial blood. James's communicator exploded with chatter. The sphere had activated on its own, containment failing, quantum signatures spreading through the ship like a virus. They ran together toward the laboratory deck, but Sophie already knew what they'd find. She'd seen it 1,000 times in the visions the sphere had forced into her mind. Dr. Voss stood before the containment field, arms outstretched, eyes rolled back white. The sphere floated free, pulsing with light that hurt to perceive, and around it, space itself was folding, revealing glimpses of elsewhere. Vast dark oceans between dimensions, and things swimming in those oceans. Things that were now very aware humanity existed. "Nadia, step back," James shouted, but Dr. Voss was smiling. "He's here," she whispered. "Raymond is here, in the space between spaces. He's been trying to warn us, but I can bring him back. I can—" The sphere exploded outward in a wave of quantum probability. Sophie felt her consciousness fragment across a million timelines, experiencing every possible version of this moment simultaneously. In one, she died instantly. In another, she became something more than human. In a third, she watched everyone she loved dissolve into quantum foam. But in this timeline, this single, precious timeline, she grabbed James's hand and screamed the coordinates she'd seen in her vision. The impossible location folded into 11 dimensions. The ship's computer, overwhelmed by the quantum cascade, accepted the numbers, and the meridian jumped. Not through normal space. Not through any space humans had ever traveled. They moved through the space between spaces, the realm the sphere had opened, the place where the laws of physics were suggestions and consciousness was currency. They moved through the dark ocean. And in the dark ocean, ancient things stirred, drawn by the ripples humanity had just created. When reality solidified again, they were somewhere else. The testing zone coordinates had been abandoned. Instead, they floated before a massive structure, a space station built by hands that were decidedly not human, its architecture impossible and beautiful and terrifying, and they were not alone. Dozens of alien ships surrounded them, weapons charged, their designs unlike anything in Earth's databases. On every screen, the same message appeared in perfect English, somehow translated by technology humanity didn't possess. You have trespassed. You have touched what was forbidden. Now you will answer for it. Sophie collapsed into James's arms, her nose bleeding, quantum visions finally fading to whispers. She'd saved them from immediate destruction, but she'd delivered them somewhere infinitely worse. Dr. Voss lay unconscious on the laboratory floor. The sphere clutched against her chest like a child holding a beloved toy, and in her dreams she walked hand in hand with her mentor through corridors of folded space, while he tried desperately to explain why they needed to destroy what they'd found. Before it was too late. Before the things in the dark came home. First Contact's Shadow. The space station was called Threshold, and it had been built 10,000 years before humanity discovered fire. Ambassador Kira Tanaka learned this within the first 5 minutes of what could only loosely be called negotiations. The second thing she learned was that they were prisoners, not guests, and the distinction mattered greatly to the 17 species currently deliberating their fate. You understand the gravity of your situation? The voice came from a being that resembled a mantis crossed with shadow, all chitinous angles and too many joints. This was Commander Vorath of the Kelshani Collective, and his species had been guarding Threshold for 3 millennia. Kira sat alone at a table designed for bodies very different from hers, acutely aware that James and his security team waited outside, weapons confiscated. The rest of the Meridian's crew remained aboard their ship, surrounded by enough firepower to vaporize a small moon. I understand we've caused concern, Kira said carefully, but I assure you, we didn't know this place existed. We found an artifact and the pulse key. Vorath's mandibles clicked in what might have been agitation or laughter. Of course you found one. Your kind always does. Young species barely crawling from your gravity well, stumbling across weapons left behind by the architects. Weapons? Kira's stomach dropped. We thought it was a propulsion technology. It is. And nuclear fission is just a way to generate electricity. Vorath leaned forward, his multifaceted eyes reflecting her image 100 times over. Tell me, Ambassador, what do you know of the space between spaces? Kira thought of Sophie's visions, of Dr. Voss's obsession, of the impossible journey that had brought them here. Very little. We've theorized about quantum foam, about dimensions beyond our perception, but there are older things than your theories, Ambassador Tanaka. The universe you perceive is the surface of an ocean. Beneath it lies depths your mathematics cannot fathom, and in those depths, things live. Things that the architects themselves feared. A hologram materialized above the table, a visualization of the cosmos Kira had never seen before. Galaxies clustered like cells in tissue, and between them, threading through the dark matter like mycelium through soil, were pathways. Quantum corridors were the rules of causality bent and broke. The pulse keys allow travel through these pathways. Vorath continued. Instantaneous movement across any distance. Perfect teleportation. The ultimate freedom from the tyranny of light speed. Then why aren't you using them? Kira asked. Why guard them instead of... Because every time you use one, you send ripples through the deep ocean. And the things that live there, they follow the ripples home. The hologram changed. Kira watched in horror as a civilization activated a pulse key, watched as their ships blinked across galaxies in eye blinks, watched as their empire flourished. Then she watched as darkness seeped through the quantum pathways they'd opened, watched as cities burned, as planets went silent, as an entire species learned too late that they'd rung a dinner bell for predators beyond comprehension. The architects created the keys, Vorath said softly, and the things the keys summoned destroyed the architects. Only we remained, the species young enough and weak enough to be beneath notice. We sealed away every key we found. We built Threshold as a warning and a prison. For 10,000 years, the deep ocean has been quiet. Kira's hands trembled. Until we rang the bell. Until you rang the bell. Silence fell, broken only by the station's ambient hum. Kira thought of Earth, of billions who had no idea their fate had just been sealed by curiosity and desperation. She thought of her daughter, 8 years old, who'd cried when Mommy had to go to space again. How long do we have? Vorath's posture changed, something almost like sympathy creeping into his alien bearing. That depends. If you use the key only once, perhaps centuries. The ripples travel slowly through the quantum medium. But if you used it multiple times, the sphere activated on its own, Kira whispered. And our navigator, she's been connected to it somehow. She's been seeing things, experiencing quantum states, then weeks, perhaps days. Vorath stood, his shadow stretching across the table like a prophecy. The things in the deep are already coming, Ambassador. They are ancient and patient and utterly without mercy. They do not negotiate. They do not conquer. They consume and they move on. Kira rose, forcing steel into her spine despite the terror flooding her veins. Then we need to prepare a defense. You've survived this long, you must know how to fight them. Fight them? Vorath's laughter was like breaking glass. No, Ambassador. You misunderstand. When they arrive, everyone in your region of space will die. Humans, Kelshani, all 17 species here. The only question is how much damage you cause trying to run. Then what are you doing here? Why maintain Threshold if it's hopeless? Because we remember what it was like before. Before the architects fell and the galaxy learned fear. We maintain Threshold so that perhaps in another 1,000,000 years, when the things in the deep have forgotten us again, new species might find our warnings before they find the keys. Vorath moved toward the door, then paused. You're Dr. Voss. She's still connected to your key, isn't she? Kira nodded. Then she's already half in their world. Part of her consciousness exists in the quantum medium now. That's why she could navigate there. She's becoming a bridge between states. His eyes fixed on Kira with sudden intensity. There's a reason the architects built the keys despite the danger. A reason they risked everything. What reason? The things in the deep, they're not invincible. They exist in quantum superposition, in multiple states simultaneously. They can't be killed by conventional means because they're never entirely here. But if you could collapse their waveform, force them into a single state. Vorath's mandibles clicked rapidly. The architects were building a weapon, a quantum pulse that would collapse every superposition in a given radius, forcing everything, including the deep dwellers, into singular, vulnerable states. Kira's breath caught. And that's what our key is? A weapon component? Perhaps, or perhaps a targeting system, or perhaps just a trigger. Vorath opened the door, revealing James waiting anxiously beyond. The architects never finished their weapon. They died before they could test it. But the mathematics are in Threshold's databanks. If you're desperate enough, foolish enough, if you value the temporary survival of your species over the safety of the galaxy. Show me, Kira said. James stepped forward, his hand finding hers instinctively. Kira, we should discuss this with... There's no time for discussion. She squeezed his hand, drawing strength from the contact. Show me what we need to do. Vorath led them deeper into Threshold, through corridors that predated human civilization, past chambers filled with technologies that would take centuries to understand. And with each step, Kira felt the weight of responsibility crushing down on her shoulders. They were about to either save humanity or doom the galaxy, possibly both. Behind them, in the Meridian's laboratory, Dr. Voss's eyes snapped open. She sat up, moving with fluid grace that was no longer entirely her own. Sophie, monitoring her recovery, backed away slowly. Doctor? Are you okay? Nadia turned to face her, and Sophie saw immediately that something had changed. The woman's eyes held depths they shouldn't contain, reflecting light from spectrums human retinas couldn't perceive. I spoke with Raymond, Nadia said, her voice layered with harmonics. He's been trapped in the quantum medium for 3 years, existing in superposition. He's seen them, Sophie. The things that are coming. And he showed me something, a way to complete what the architect started. Sophie's hand moved toward the emergency comm, but Nadia was faster. Not moving through space, but blinking across it, suddenly standing inches away. When had she learned to do that? Don't be afraid, Nadia whispered. I'm still me. I'm just also more. And I know now what we have to do. She pressed her palm against Sophie's forehead, and Sophie saw. She saw the weapon the architects had dreamed of, a device that would detonate quantum certainty across light years, collapsing superpositions, forcing the impossible into the merely improbable. She saw the calculations, the engineering requirements, the terrible cost of activation. She saw that it would require a human mind connected to the quantum medium, a bridge between states, willing to hold reality open while the pulse propagated. She saw that whoever did it would never come back. When Nadia pulled away, Sophie was crying. You can't. Nadia, you'll cease to exist. I ceased to exist the moment I touched the sphere, Nadia said gently. Now I'm just a ghost deciding how to haunt. She looked toward Earth, though the planet was light years distant. But first we need to build the weapon. And for that, we need the ambassador to convince our new friends that humanity's survival is worth the risk. In the negotiation chamber, Kira was discovering that some choices transcended morality. Vorath had shown her the schematics, the predictions, the cold mathematics of genocide versus extinction. If they built and activated the quantum pulse, they would kill the deep dwellers. But the pulse wouldn't discriminate. Every being within 10 light years existing in quantum superposition would collapse into singular states. That included billions of organisms whose biology naturally utilized quantum effects. Entire ecosystems would die. If they didn't activate it, the deep dwellers would consume everything anyway. More slowly, more certainly, but with equal finality. How do you live with this? Kira asked Vorath. Knowing that survival requires becoming monsters? We don't, Vorath replied simply. We carry the guilt and continue anyway. That's what sentience is, Ambassador. Bearing impossible weights and calling it consciousness. James's hand tightened around hers. She looked at him and saw the same resolve she felt crystallizing in her chest. Tell us how to build it. And in the dark ocean between spaces, ancient things stirred faster now, following the ripples of quantum disturbance toward their source. They didn't think in ways humans could understand, didn't feel emotion or malice. They simply existed, consuming, growing, spreading through the cracks between dimensions. They were coming, and humanity had just decided to fight back. The weapon was nearly complete. A massive array of quantum capacitors arranged in a sphere around the pulse key, drawing power from 3 different stars via exotic matter conduits. The mathematics were elegant and terrible, a calculation that would force the universe to choose a single state instead of embracing superposition. Ambassador. Kira Tanaka had returned from Threshold with the blueprints and the guilt. Now she stood before the United Earth Council, watching their faces as she explained what was about to happen. We will kill billions of organisms, she said simply. Quantum-based life forms we don't even know exist. The moral weight of this action will haunt humanity forever. But if we don't act, everything dies anyway. So the question isn't whether we have the right to do this. It's whether we have the courage. The vote was unanimous. Not because they were brave, but because extinction clarified priorities wonderfully. Admiral Cross initiated the fleet coordination. Every armed vessel humanity possessed took position around the quantum weapon, forming a defensive perimeter against enemies that could appear anywhere. It was futile, but it was something. Warriors need to feel like warriors, even at the end. Sophie made her choice. She left James sleeping and walked to the laboratory where Nadia was making final preparations. The older woman turned, unsurprised. I knew you'd come. I've seen the probabilities too, Sophie. The futures where I'm the anchor and you survive, they're clearer, more stable. But you also see the ones where I do it, where James lives to meet our daughter. They stared at each other. 2 women who'd been changed by touching something ancient. Now facing the oldest choice. Whose life matters more? We could flip a coin, Nadia suggested with a sad smile. That feels appropriately quantum. But before they could decide, alarms shrieked through the ship. On every screen, the same image appeared. darkness spreading through space like ink through water. The deep dwellers had arrived in force, and they were larger than any projection had suggested. Not creatures. Not even organisms. They were entropy given consciousness, void given hunger. They consumed stars and ships and hope with equal indifference. "Activate the weapon," Admiral Cross commanded, her voice steady despite watching her fleet dissolve like sugar in acid. "Now!" Sophie and Nadia looked at each other one last time. Then, moving with perfect synchronization, they both stepped into the quantum field surrounding the pulse key. James woke to find Sophie gone. He ran to the laboratory, but the door was sealed. Through the window, he saw both women suspended in impossible light, their bodies flickering between states. He pounded on the door, screaming their names. Sophie turned her head, an action that occurred in 17 different timelines simultaneously, and mouthed 3 words. "I love you." Nadia raised her arms. The pulse key blazed with light that shouldn't exist, and the quantum pulse erupted outward at the speed of causality itself, collapsing probabilities, forcing reality to choose. For 10 light years in every direction, the universe became certain. The deep dwellers tried to escape, to slip back into superposition, but there was nowhere to go. The pulse caught them, dragged them into singular existence, and they burned. They burned like stars, like hopes, like every impossible thing forced to become real. They died, but so did everything else that lived in quantum uncertainty. Organisms humans had never discovered vanished from existence. Ecosystems collapsed. Alien species that had naturally existed in superposition were forced into singularity and couldn't survive. Helena watched the readings, watched the casualties climb, and knew that humanity had just committed the largest genocide in recorded history. They'd saved themselves by becoming monsters. When the pulse ended, the Meridian's laboratory was silent. James broke through the door to find Sophie and Nadia collapsed on the floor, barely breathing. Both women were translucent, flickering like bad reception. "Sophie." He cradled her, feeling her pulse flutter weak and uncertain. She opened her eyes, eyes that now reflected quantum probabilities. "Did it work?" "You killed them. You saved us. At what cost?" She could still see the futures, but they were dimmer now, less certain. In most of them, she faded completely. But in a few, in a precious few, she learned to exist between states. Learned to be both and neither. Learned to be human and quantum and alive. Nadia smiled. "Raymond's waiting for me. In the space between. I can feel him." Her body flickered one last time, then she was simply gone. Not dead, but translated, existing now as pure probability. Sophie felt herself following, felt the call of the quantum medium. But James's hand was solid and warm and real, anchoring her to this timeline, this state, this life. "Stay," he whispered. "Please stay." And Sophie, who'd seen 1,000 futures, chose to stay for the one where she got to watch their daughter grow up. Earth survived. The galaxy survived, but it survived changed, aware now that safety required terrible sacrifice. Humanity had saved everyone by becoming the thing they'd feared, users of weapons that broke reality itself. They'd won. But victory tasted like ash and looked like the empty space where Nadia Voss used to be. What waits beyond? 3 months after the pulse, humanity was still counting the cost. The immediate threat was gone. The deep dwellers burned away into quantum certainty and death. But the galaxy was different now. 10 light years of space had been fundamentally altered, forced into singular states, and nobody knew what long-term effects that would have. Sophie stood before the memorial wall in Earth's orbital station, her hand resting on James's shoulder. Her body had stabilized into something between states, not entirely quantum, not entirely classical. She flickered sometimes when stressed, her consciousness briefly existing in multiple locations before collapsing back to one. Doctors called it quantum integration syndrome. Sophie called it the price of survival. 743 species, she said quietly, reading the memorial data. That's how many quantum-based life forms we extinguished. Most of them we'd never even discovered. They just stopped existing when the pulse hit. James pulled her closer. And 6 trillion sentient beings who would have died if we'd done nothing. The math is terrible no matter how you calculate it. Math isn't the problem. Morality is. Sophie looked out at Earth, beautiful and blue and guilty. We saved ourselves by committing genocide. How do we live with that? Carefully, humbly, by remembering what we did and swearing never to do it again. He kissed her temple. And by building the future we fought for. Sophie's hand moved to her stomach, where their daughter was growing. A child conceived in a maintenance closet while the universe burned, born into a galaxy that had learned fear and paid prices too steep to name. She would grow up in a world that knew the edge of extinction and chose life anyway. Admiral Helena Cross had resigned her commission. She stood now before the United Earth Council, giving her final report. The deep dwellers are gone from this region of space, she said, her voice carrying the weight of 3 months without sleep. Threshold Station's long-range sensors confirm it. But they're not extinct. They exist throughout the galaxy, in regions we haven't touched. And they remember. Quantum consciousness doesn't forget. The Council shifted uncomfortably. Are you saying they'll come back? The Prime Minister asked. I'm saying we taught them we can hurt them. We're no longer beneath their notice. We're either potential prey or potential threat. Helena's eyes were cold. We need to decide which one we want to be. A counselor stood. Admiral, surely you're not suggesting we build more quantum weapons. I'm suggesting we prepare for the possibility that we haven't seen the last of them. And next time, we might not have friendly aliens to give us blueprints. On Threshold Station, Commander Vorath watched humanity's broadcasts with something approaching respect. The humans had activated the weapon, paid the price, and survived. More remarkably, they seemed to understand what they'd done instead of celebrating blindly. Perhaps this species will break the pattern, his second-in-command clicked. Perhaps they'll use their victory as a lesson instead of a license. Perhaps. Vorath wasn't optimistic. In 10,000 years, he'd seen species rise and fall. The ones who survived first contact with the deep dwellers usually became monsters themselves, wielding quantum weapons freely until something worse came along and taught them humility. But the humans had one thing others hadn't. They'd had someone willing to become the bridge. Dr. Voss existed now in quantum superposition, neither alive nor dead, watching humanity from the space between spaces, and occasionally she interfered. Sophie felt it first. She was in the laboratory, now renamed the Voss Memorial Research Center, when the air shimmered. For a moment, Nadia stood beside her, translucent but present. You're still here, Sophie whispered. Everywhere and nowhere. Nadia's voice echoed from 11 dimensions simultaneously. I exist in the quantum medium now, Sophie. I see things. I've traveled the pathways the deep dwellers use. And I've learned something important. What? The architects didn't die because the deep dwellers killed them. They died because they became like the deep dwellers. They used quantum consciousness so much, lived in superposition so completely, that eventually they couldn't exist in singular states anymore. They translated themselves into the quantum medium, thinking it was transcendence. Sophie's blood chilled. But it wasn't. No, they just became prey for things older and hungrier. The deep dwellers we fought, they were the architects, Sophie. Or what the architects became after existing as pure probability for 1,000,000 years. Nadia's form flickered. That's the real danger of quantum technology. Not that it attracts monsters, but that it turns you into one. Then why did you show us how to build the weapon? Why help us if you knew? Because you needed to survive today to worry about tomorrow. And because I'm hoping humanity is wise enough to learn from the architect's mistake. Nadia reached out, her hand passing through Sophie's like cold mist. Don't follow us into the dark, Sophie. Don't use quantum consciousness as a crutch. Stay human, stay real, stay singular. Promise me. I promise. Nadia smiled, and then she was gone, dispersed back into quantum probability. But she left something behind. A data packet, downloaded directly into Sophie's quantum-altered consciousness. Schematics for a quantum barrier, a way to seal Earth's region of space from the deep pathways. It would take decades to build, consume resources on an unprecedented scale, and essentially lock humanity into a 10-light-year bubble. But it would keep them safe, keep them from using quantum travel as a shortcut, keep them from following the architects into transcendence and dissolution. Sophie brought the schematics to James, to Admiral Cross, to Ambassador Kira. They studied them in silence. A cage, James said finally. She's suggesting we cage ourselves. For our own protection, Kira added. So we don't become addicted to quantum technology. Helena Cross pulled up a galactic map. But if we seal ourselves off, we're trapped. We can't expand, can't explore. We're prisoners in a 10-light-year cell. Better a small cage than becoming monsters, Sophie said.